I'm here sitting with my mother who just celebrated her 83rd birthday, and we thought it wise to just sit down and get to understand her story in her own words, because we had this conversation time and time again, and it seems fascinating every time we hear it. So we thought it wise to bring it through this method, and hopefully you get to hear it from herself. So her story. So, mommy, again, how are you? Happy birthday! Happy 83rd birthday.
Thank you.
Okay. So today we talk all the time, and you narrate your story, your life story from birth. Your different stages. Going to the hostel, working for the church, working for the Sunday school, and I know it's a lot, but let's see how much we can give, and eventually we can get there with your full story.
Mhm.
So, who is Sue Dolly Blackman Telewoda?
Okay, the daughter of John Edwards Blackman, married to my mother, Susannah Beatrice Fadia. And they had 7 children in all. 4 died that I did not know, and 3 of us lived. Of the 7 children, I was the 7th child and the last. At 3 months old, I was told my father separated from my mother, and she took me and left me with my grandparents. But before I got to know them, they died. I did not know any of them. So I was left with my mom's sister, oldest sister. And I stayed with her until I was about maybe 8, 9 years old. And I was very sick. And someone told my mom about my illness, and she came and got me and took me to Firestone Kavala plantation where she worked at the hospital. I was hospitalized and was told that I had pneumonia in both of my sides. After that, my mom kept me for a while, but being a working mother, she left from 6 o'clock in the morning to 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And leaving a little child in the hospital camp where she stayed was difficult. So I had 2 sisters living in Plebo. I'm talking about Maryland County, and there's a place called Plebo out of the county.
Just before you continue, your date of birth, and you
I was
continue.
born on August 21st, 1941. And I was told it was during the, I think, end of the Second World War. The story went at the time, but I was too young to know. However, so I had to go from one sister to another. When it got hot with one sister, I went to the other sister. And that's how I were until I got to be about 10, 12 years old. And then later on, after that, one of the sisters that I lived with moved from Plebo to Harper City. And I went along with her. And there I attended the Fatima College High School. In Plebo, I attended another Catholic school, the St. Francis Catholic School. And I was there until I finished, well, not until I finished, but after a while, some problems started and I had to go back to my mom for a while. And while she relocated me to her sister, look, I don't want to call names, with her sister. And I stayed there until I got, I think, but in the sixth or seventh grade. And then something unfortunate happened. I went back to my mom, but stayed just a few days. When working at the hospital, she was responsible to prepare foods, menus for the private patients, and she was the supervisor for the hospital material and hospital materials. That is the beddings and the beddings for the hospital. So one of these private patients were admitted, and she asked my mom to prepare some noodle soup for her. That's what she felt like eating instead of the menu that was served. And so my mom went home after work, prepared the soup, and asked me to take it to her. And when I took it to her, and I opened the door, and she said, "Oh, who's this little girl smiling at me?" And I said, "I'm Mrs. Spider's daughter. She asked me to bring this soup to you." And there and then she fell in love with me and said, "Oh, I will tell your mom I like you." And from that conversation, she asked my mom to go and live with her in Harper City. So these were not many days or weeks or months that I lived with my mom, because the place was not conducive for a young girl. So it was just like spot check in and check out. So my mom agreed, and I went to live with this family, a Reverend and his wife. By that time, I think I was about, let's say, in the seventh grade. And after I completed the 8th grade, during that vacation, my church, the United Methodist Church in Harper City, asked the Sunday school children to learn the catechism. And I was giving one of the catechisms to study. I did not know what it was all about until one Sunday afternoon when we went to Sunday school. They said, "Oh, we are having a competition here. All those that receive catechisms should come to the Sunday school that day. After church, we had Sunday schools, and then we'll have the contest." And there were many that were a part of this contest. But at a certain point, everyone dropped except me. And the congregation said that, okay, to be sure that she's the winner, continue to question her until she reaches the end of the book. And as God would have had it, I answered all of the questions until the end of the book. And I was giving a Bible as my present. I had no idea what was behind this. No one told me. No one mentioned anything. But after a month, I was told that I had to leave Capalmas and come to Monrovia, because the United Methodist Church was then opening a hostel. And there were other mission hostels around. There was Bromley, there was Bethany, there was Swain, and a few others. So they did not want to take girls from these hostels and take them to the Methodist place. So they asked churches around the country to send a representative. And the outcome of that test or that competition was to get the best Sunday school child to get a scholarship. And so I was chosen. to come to Monrovia. I had no idea, no one briefed me about anything. They just gave me instructions, put me on a plane that you would be going to the hostel and they would meet you at the airport. And after I stayed at the airport, I arrived, I left Harper in 1958, about February.
What you just explained pretty much was your years in Harper.
Yeah.
Pretty much from
childhood,
from birth up to the stage where you had the opportunity to go to,
and that was 17 years. By that time, I was 17 years old.
Okay.
And
so, but just to also get clarity that from birth, it was mainly with family, and then this couple that you met at a later age from the hospital, but not necessarily with your parents, because I
never lived with my parents. I don't ever remember living with my father, because at 3 months old leaving, my grandparents kept me until I was about, like I said, the age when I got sick and my mom came for me. I didn't even know my mom. So I grew up almost 17 years old, had never lived with my mother. And I knew I had a mother. I loved her, but she was never around. So I was not one of those children that were fortunate to live with the parents and got the love of the parents. I was like a loner and grew up alone, even though I was with relatives. But when I was coming up, it wasn't like now, where children are so free with parents. Then it was work and go to work and sleep, you get up and work. And so it was very difficult years for me.
So far, we talked about birth to age 17, where you live in Harper. Before we go to Monrovia, when you came to the hostel, what was your Sunday school life in Harper growing up?
Well, in Harper, we went to Sunday school in the afternoon. After service, we went home, and then around 2 o'clock, the children went to Sunday school between 1 and 2, and were there for the time. And it was during that time that the competition that I spoke about was held. And I won the competition, and at the time, like I mentioned before, I didn't know what it was all about, and that was to get girls from around the country, from the Methodist churches, to come to the Methodist hostel to start a new mission there, as where the other churches having around the country.
Okay. So what happened when you moved to Monrovia to the hostel on that scholarship?
I was not told anything. It's just that I had won a scholarship from the Methodist church, and they were sending us. I was coming to the girls' hostel, and they would meet us at the airport. There were 3 of us from Cape Almas, one from Plebo, one from Harper. I was from Harper, and another one was from Grand Cru. And we all came and lived at the hostel. We were told nothing, because seemingly everything had been told to the congregation from whence we have come. But after my 2 years at CWA, the matron called me one day and said, "Susannah, the scholarship was for 2 years, and now your parents will have to pay the tuition, that is for the College of West Africa and also for the hostel." And that was impossible, because my parents were not together. And where my mother worked, she was not making that much to at least keep me up, support me at the school. So that meant I had to leave CWA and look for another school. And one of the sisters that I stayed with in Cape Almas before had come to Monrovia and wanted me to live with her, and I really didn't want to live with her because I knew what I had passed through before. So my father had a cousin in Monrovia, and he arranged that I live with her. So, and that's where I lived when I came to Monrovia after we left the hostel for vacation. We lived with her on Front and Randall Streets, right at the corner there, opposite the old Marina Entertainment Center. So when she insisted that I should not live with a stranger, I should come and live with her. And as being an elder sister, she arranged that I go to live with her, and I went back to live with her. But the problem was she wanted me to stay in Monrovia and go to Haywood. And I didn't want that because I didn't want what had happened before when I lived with her to happen again.
How did BWI come about, like leaving the hostel and wanting to go to BWI?
Decided to leave Cinco where we lived, to go to town to find out if I would find anybody from Cape Palmas, because usually when they came, they would walk on Camp Johnson Road to look at the stores and things, to at least send word to my mom this was the situation and how she could help, even though I knew it would be impossible. But I didn't see, before I got there, I didn't even have money to leave my house in Cinco to go to the parking station where I thought it would have been. So I, standing by the road, a taxi driver that I was fortunate to always see when I'm going to town passed and stopped and asked where I was going. I said I was going to town. I said, but I didn't have any money. He said, you my customer, come out, we carry you. And while I was going with him, I said, I'm not going to town. I'm trying to go to BWI, but I have never been there before. He said, oh, don't worry. If you're going to BWI, I will carry you. I said, you know how the passengers can be plenty on McDonald Street. How you will get passengers? He said, man, if God want you to go, I will find passengers. And truly, as soon as we got there, for some reason, and parked, because I didn't see anybody when I went from Cape Palmas that I could send a message. So when he parked, it wasn't even good 5 minutes. The car was full with people. And he said, man, I told you. So we started our trip to BWI. And when I got in Cinco, I said, hello, everybody in the taxi. I said, I'm going somewhere where I've never been before. I don't know where it is. But when we get there, please tell me when I've reached. And they said, where are you going? I said, to BWI. And an instructor in the car, one of the passengers said, oh, I work at BWI. And when I go, I will show you. He said, where on BWI are you going? I said, I'm going to the principal's office, because he had worked in Cape Palmas before. One of my sisters knew him, the same sister. So I was just going to say, can I come to BWI again? What's the process and things like that. Unfortunately, he was not there. The man said, oh, usually vacation time, he goes to his farm. But I will carry you to the registrar's office. And he carried me to the registrar's office. And again, I don't want to call names who was the registrar then, but he got angry and said, these girls stay in Monrovia, hang around, and they hear the announcements on the air and they don't come. And now they come late. I don't think I can take her. And the young fella said, but this is a lady that has come to school. And are you turning her away? He said, yes, I'm turning her away because she's late. He said, okay, I will stand for her. He said, okay, as a member of the faculty here, I will accept her. But if she fails the first period, I will send her out. And I said, that's fair enough. And that's how I got to BWI. And I was just being admitted by the registrar, but I had not gone through the process of getting what I needed, which was another problem. I came back to Monrovia. I had nothing to go by because I couldn't tell my sister that I was going because she told me she didn't want me to go. And I was determined to go. And people in the community, I had always been friendly with people. They got together, bought my toiletries and things that I needed. And I told her when it was time for me to go that I had gone to BW. I said, when did I go? I said, oh, I went at a certain time and I was admitted. And that's how I left and went to BWI.
So you came to Monrovia on a scholarship,
Yes.
which lasted for 2
2
years that you
years
didn't know. So you
that I
couldn't
did.
complete the program in Monrovia.
No, I couldn't.
So how was your fees and paid for at BWI?
When I left Cape Almas and came to Monrovia, I mean, it was just God's leading. Because as I went to BWI, I had nothing. Friends helped me. My neighbors at the time helped me to go. So I went to BWI without even knowing what the tuition were or anything, because I knew I would not have been just admitted. I would have to come back to look for tuition. But when I went, we went like on a Thursday, and Monday was supposed to go to the registrar's office to pay our school fees. So that Thursday, Friday, Saturday, I told the dean, I said, I have to pay my tuition by Monday, but I don't have the money. So again, I was going like I went before, to go to Monrovia, go to Camp Johnson Road to see if I would have seen anybody. So when I went to the dean's house to tell her I was going, she said, okay, go in there, go where you are, my dear. So I said, okay. Then I heard a knock at the door. And I said, oh, Dean, someone has come to visit you. She said, go and see who it is. And it was one of my instructors from CWA that taught me. And I don't know how he got there. I don't know how he knew I was at BWI, because I didn't know anybody in Monrovia. I had just come. And he said, oh, Susannah, when school opened, I didn't see you. I said, yes, I had a problem, so I couldn't go back. He said, why? And I said, oh, I did not have the tuition to go back to the hostel nor to CWA. I said, but I was just on my way going to Monrovia to see if I could get my tuition. And he said, no, I had to come I heard you had come, and I had to come to look for you because you were one of my best students in the class. And when I didn't see you, I said, no, somebody told me you were here, just by the stroke of God. And he said, how much is the school fees? At the time, the whole year was $45 at BWI. And I said, $45. And he put his hand in his pocket, and he took out $50. So I had money to pay my school fees, and also had a $5 left over.
How was it at BWI?
At BWI, it happened that one of the people that was at BWI that had come from Cape Almas was my brother. And when I entered the class, for some reason, I think he was still there or he had left, I don't know. But for some reason, when I entered the class, my teacher then asked, what's your name? And I said, my name is Susannah Blackman. She said, are you Ernest Blackman's sister? I said, yes. He said, oh. But later, after she just thought that whatever happened with my brother would have happened with me. But she didn't mention it at any point at that time. But as I went, she taught me general science. And as we went through our studies, she called me one day. She said, but you're so different from your brother. I said, why? She said, you make good grades, but your brother was not as serious as you were. I mean, as you are now. I said, well, sorry about that. But I became her favorite student. Like, she's going out, she will always leave me in her class and say, okay, take a watch till I come back. And that's how it went. And then at the end of the first period, I passed in all of my subjects because you go to the first place, you have to get adjusted. So they did not throw me out of PWI. I stayed. But then Mr. Weaver at the time was very strict. If you fail in one subject, you have to throw the chair from the campus, across the campus, down to Germany, across the road, and down to the other area, which was called New York. He said so that because your parents, they didn't send you there to play, they send you there to study. But the next time, even if you pass in all your subjects and you go on a road, you will throw the chair. And I said, no, I can't throw chair here. So I was determined to do the best in my studies so I could pass. So the second period, I went on a road. From the second period, and the first year, at the time it was first year before not ninth grade. And to the end, I never left the honor roll. It was like honor roll and honor roll mention. You either get the 2 stars or you get the 3 stars or you get the 2 stars. And I kept that up, not knowing. I knew my grades were good, but I didn't know what other people were making. So at the end of the school year, he said the registrar came, we would meet in the auditorium, and they would say what the students did and what classes did, what the different vocations did. And then he said, I have a confession to make, but I was not listening. I was like talking, listening to something.
This is the registrar who didn't want you to
who did not want me to enter the program. Okay. And he said, I have a confession to make. And he went on talking, but he got to a certain point. I said, that sounds like my story. Then I started listening. He said, and I would have driven a brilliant student out of this compound, out of this campus, because I did not know who she was. He said, so I want to announce for the first time in the history of BWI, a lady has taken the head of her class, made the highest grade in the whole school. And that person is Susannah B. And the tears, started coming down from my eyes. I said, well, Lord, I thank you. And so when the history of BWI is written, I was the first girl that took the head of her class. And the boys in my class were so angry. They felt that why a girl must take the class, and they were there making grades. They didn't say it there, but that's what the feelings afterward.
Head of the class, meaning the valedictorian
of my class, but the highest grade in the whole school.
The highest grade in the whole
with
school.
All of the vocations that were made. I was in the secretariats.
And the first girl.
And the first girl.
And you were that person.
That was our first girl. Then to come back now, the second year of the school fees, again, I couldn't inform my mother because I knew she was not able. My father was remarried and things like that. So at the beginning of the second year there, my father died. And they came and carried me to the farmers for the burial. When I came back to school, the principal sent for me and another girl whose father had died around that same time. And he said there's a scholarship that has come from a convalescent home in the States. A lady has sent for this scholarship for 2 deserving students. So since your fathers have just died, knowing that they have been paying our school fees, we will give you these scholarships.
So you stay at BWI from 67 to 71, and then you left and came down to Monrovia.
Yeah.
What happened after that?
Well, I was in Monrovia. I had not gone to look for a job as yet because I had to get settled. I had to resettle from BWI to Monrovia, and in the process of doing that, a friend came to me one day and said, oh, someone called me and said they need a secretary, and I told him, I said, oh, I know someone who is a secretary. So he came and he told me, and they said, but in fact, we need a secretary right now. So could you bring her this afternoon? Unfortunately, when we went that afternoon, the managing director was not there. So when the next day, the managing director was there. He asked me if he interviewed me, and I answered his questions. And then he called his secretary to give me a test. And the test was to check my typing speed, and I should write a story, and to check my diction and what have you, my English. And again, God was with me. I passed the test. I wrote a story, a short story, and he asked me, where are you working? I said, I don't have a job. I just came from BWI where I was teaching. And he said, but you have a job. And because at BWI, we're paid like $150 a month. And he said, well, we'll start you with $250. So that was a joyous day for me, you know. And he said, you have to start right away. I said, no problem, I can start tomorrow. And that's how I got to telecom. And at the time, they were a managing team from abroad to manage the plant, the telephone system that was in the country was having a lot of problems. So they came to change from one system to another. And that's where they assigned me. They wanted me to work with this team. And that's where I was assigned. And while working with the team, the head of because it was his team managing the whole of the corporation, and they found out there were some weaknesses in the corporation that they needed to improve. So they took me from this as a secretary from the general manager's office of this team, and sent me to the managing director's office to be the special assistant. Worked there for a while, and after splitting his office out, the same management team went to the managing director and said, we're having a lot of problems in the commercial section department. So we think we want Mrs. Telewoda, I was married then, to go down and be the commercial manager. And I said, wow. And so I went down again. God was with me. The cooperation between me and the workers, we raised the income of the corporation from where it was in thousands to millions. And they told me, okay, you stay there and let's see how you will behave. And finally, after about 6-7 months in the area, they made me commercial manager proper. And that's where I worked from 71 to 1980 after the coup. After the coup, we had each local manager, they had an expatriate for the technical side of it. And during the coup, they sent all of the expatriates back home. And so it was only the nationals managing it. But the stress of the coup and the wanting this, there were problems here. Everybody wanted telephones, and the system didn't work that way. You have to have the plan where you would be able to
the
capacity in order to put in the telephones. And so I fell sick, and I was taken to the hospital, and the doctor said my pressure was very high, and I had to be quiet. And then I told him, I said, it was impossible to be quiet for where I worked. And he said, well, if it's not possible, then I will have to tell you to change your job. And I said, I prefer my life than a job. And that's how I left telecom during the coup. I think I was in July of 1980. And I came home.
Okay. So, work at telecom started as what?
Secretary.
Secretary. and you rose to the position of commercial
commercial
manager,
manager.
and you stayed there until after the coup, like you said, and then you resigned because it was just
The stress was
the
too much.
stress, yeah, where you were hospitalized. So after that period, what did you do next after leaving telecom?
After that period, I stayed home and rested, took my treatment, and another day, one of the customers that I served at Telecom had a problem and went to the office. I said, "Where's Mrs. Telewoda?" Mrs. Telewoda doesn't work here. She wasn't well and she resigned. This person found my place and came and said, "Oh, I went to Telecom with some problems, so you are not there." And all of the time, you were the only one who helped me because I had been going there for so many years and I had to come to find you and see what happened. And I explained what happened. He said, "But then if you're not working, why not come and work for me, for my company?" I said, "Right now, I don't want to work for anybody. I just want to be quiet and rest. And then later on, if it's possible, I will inform you." And after a couple of months, when I thought I was ready, I worked with Oreo Enterprises, where they sold uniforms at the time. They had a bounded warehouse at the port, and I went in as administrative manager for the company, and I worked there from 80 to, I think I will stay there 81, 82, 83. My mom got sick, and I said I would leave the job and come and take care of my mom. And I said, "Well, Lord, this is where I get my income from to help my family. And here I have to leave." But I said, "I'm sure I'm leaving with your approval, because my mom has been all and all to me, even though I never lived with her. But she had come to Monrovia for my wedding. I got married in 1974, November. And my mother came from Cape Palmas and spent the time. And that was the longest I ever lived with my mother, from 74. And she died in 1985, July. Before the end of December, the late Bishop Payne came to my house one evening with his wife and asked my husband if he could allow me to go on a conference. So the Lutheran World Federation was having their 7th assembly in Hungary, and he wanted me to go as one of the delegates with him. My husband said, "Well, don't ask me, ask her if she wants to go." And I said to him, I said, "Bishop, I just made a commitment to the Lord that I was leaving my job to come and take care of my mother." I said, "Now how can I leave my mother?" I didn't know what it was about. I think they had sent me some information one time to go to a women's assembly. A women's meeting, the Lutheran World Federation with me. And I had not gone at that point. I said, "So I don't want to leave my mother." He said, "Well, that's your mother and that's God. So decide what you want to do." Say, "But this is a very important meeting and I think you should go." And that's how I went as a delegate to Zimbabwe in 1983, at December, that I wanted to take care of my mom. I went to the meeting, and the federation is divided into continents, and the 4 continents that we were on, it was the continent of Africa that was having this pre-assembly. Each continent have a pre-assembly to get delegates for the next assembly to change the old ones. While we're at the assembly in Zimbabwe, the African churches were supposed to give 19 delegates that would replace the old delegates from the last assembly. And on this, during the election of these delegates, they elected 19 male members and no female. And so, on my first time at the meeting, but I felt it wasn't right. And so I put up my hand and asked, where were we having this conference? And they said, in Africa. I said, if this conference was held in another country and we had some African ladies attending such a conference and they had an election and they did not elect one African woman, how would you have felt? I said, would have felt bad. I said, that's how I'm feeling bad today. I said, because out of 19 positions, you do not select one woman from Africa. How do you think you all got where you were today to be on those, to be elected to those positions? Did you start from knowing what you had to do? Didn't you make errors? I said, so why the women can't go and make their errors and improve themselves? I said, why? And the whole conference broke out. The noise, I thought that everyone had been knocking the table, knocking the this, knocking the that. And they were mostly bishops. I think a few general secretaries, it seemed like the government. Every picking up high people in the church, forgetting the others. And I don't know what all I said, but that's what I was in my mind, and I said. And at the end, the noise couldn't stop. I got afraid. I said, oh Lord, I have come and said something here. And the whole it was so much noise that the presiding officer said, y'all calm down, It was almost lunchtime. He said, y'all go for lunch. After lunch, we will continue. And then when they came back, everybody, the African ladies were so happy. They all came and said, hey, sister, thank you. That's what they do to us. That's what they do to us. And when we started the session, the plenary session, Bishop Payne got up and said, I recommend Susannah B. Telewoda to represent me on the executive committee of the Lutheran World Federation. Oh, that was another rock. We do not know her. This is the first time we see her. How can you put her on the highest position? He said, you may not know her, but I know her. And he quieted down. And another old man called Father Abraham, we used to call him, from Ethiopia. He got up and recommended his daughter, but she was in the assembly too. And so she was recommended to the communication department, and I was recommended to the executive committee. And that's the end of that. So that's how I became a representative of the Lutheran Church in Liberia to the Lutheran World Federation.
This meeting in Zimbabwe was what, I guess, propelled you or put you to the level of the executive committee, right? So what happened from the executive committee beyond that point?
The executive committee was installed during the convention in Hungary. And after the installation, the executive committee was supposed to go as a committee and elect their own officers. The officers of the executive committee were 4 vice presidents representing the 4 continents that we Lutherans are on, a general secretary, a treasurer, and a president. Whichever country that assembly is held in that time, that bishop of that country becomes the president. So, And after, so in our meeting as the executive committee, they had an election. Out of the election, people nominated who they felt should be to take whichever position. And I nominated a bishop from Namibia. And as you nominate, then they put you go outside and wait. And then someone, either from the States or from Germany, I don't know. Because my mind was not even on anybody nominating me.
Right.
And so, but I think it was someone from America, one of the members from America. And they said, Susannah, so you have to go outside too. And they had an election. And I was one of the 4 vice presidents that was elected. And it happened, it was a historical one, because then the Federation itself said that I was the first female to be elected and an African to be elected. And my position was to represent the continent of Africa, all of the Lutheran churches on the continent of Africa. That would mean if there's any meetings they're having, I was supposed to go. Any problems or anything that came up in the church, I was supposed to go. And in that light, I remember the churches in South Africa had been suspended from the Lutheran World Federation because of the system that they had there. So I was one of the representatives. I was one of the persons, the members nominated to go to Namibia, because there was a Namibian church and a South African church. So I went on a pastoral visit. I was a member of a pastoral visit to the church in Namibia to settle the problem, to see if what they were suspended for was realized so that they could go back into the assembly. And so there was another delegation that went to South Africa, but I went to Namibia. And of course, at the end of that assembly, they were from our report, they were reinstated. And besides, the Pope John Paul called a day of prayer for peace around the world. And the Vatican sent an invitation to the Lutheran World Federation to say, we want you to be a member. So the General Secretary of the Federation and myself heading the delegation went to Rome. And this program was held in Assisi of Rome. Again, when we got there, I said, well, here I am in a strange place again, Lord. Take care. And then after we arrived, they took us to a very large building, auditorium. And then they began calling names and giving envelopes. And they called, after calling many names, they called my name. And I said, what? Who knows me here? And I went, I got my envelope. As I sat down, they called my name again. So for the second time, I went and I got my envelope. The first envelope said I should pray for the continent of North America. The second envelope, when I opened it, said I should say the word, the prayer for peace for all Christians around the world, because they had like 150 delegates of different religions. I didn't know they had a religion called the African traditional religion, but they were there too. And each of these different religions were asked to pray the prayer for peace in their Bible or Quran, whatever they had. And I was the one that read the prayer for peace for the Christians around the world. And the picture you see there, the first picture is when the heads of the delegation were meeting the Pope, receiving the heads of the delegation. And the second picture you see in front of the podium. And I was reading the prayer for for peace around the world. The General Secretary then, who was a Norwegian, he said, Susannah, do you know you have made church history? I said, what do you mean by church history? The 4 participating people in that prayer were the Bishop of Canterbury, the head of the Episcopalians around the world. It was Pope John the Paul, the head of all Catholics around the world. And it was the patriarch from the Greek Orthodox Church, the heads of all of the Greek Orthodox churches. He's saying you are a lay person. You're not even a deacon in your church. It's a lay person. And here these great men of the church are standing behind you. He says, so if you don't put any picture up, when you go home, put this picture up. And all who sees it and know how to read it, you say, this lady has made church history around the world. And that's the only picture I have now. That's the only picture I have. So if you see from my story, it may not be ending now, but you can see that God has always led me. And even through the trial years from birth to 17 were very difficult years in my life. I think they've helped me to cope for the rest of the years, because there was nowhere where problems came up that God did not soothe my spirit and kept me calm. And afterward came to my rescue. Another thing I should say from my story, you will notice that I never went to college. I never went to college. And even now as I sit, if I had even gone to college up to the point of getting a PhD, my life would not have been as fulfilled as it has been under the circumstances. Because God in heaven knew, because there was no way going, look how I went through high school, just by the mercy of God. And I didn't know anybody in Monrovia. I would have gone to college. Who would have paid my school fee? Where would I be living? But as I feel in my spirit that as God knew I had the mind, the heart to go, and my outcome of all of it was to be a blessing to my mother. And I'm happy before her death, I was able to give her the care. And even though before her death, when I started working, and that was the reason I said, well, even if I don't go to college, but I have to do something for my mother. And God really carried me through it all. And so I would say, had it not been for the Lord, where would I be today?
So there's one thing we left out that I think will be very important. And you talk about your childhood, where from birth to 17, that tough years of your life, where you never felt the love of a parent, and then you had to pretty much be responsible to go out, leaving your birthplace, where you were born and raised, and that's all you knew. You had to come to this strange place, but to be able to go to school and be able to get blessings along the way to complete school. But then there's this smile that you wear today. With all of that, how did that come into play that you are known for? Because when anyone see you today, I guess the first thing they see is this smile. But now that you said you had to go through this tough time, how did you find that smile to wear on your face today?
That was a smile that I prayed for. In other words, living through it during those days, or those years, it came to a point where I even wrote a letter. And oh God, I said, God, I have had it. And it wasn't like going to your mom and complaining, your mom was so far away, father was another side away, but I knew she loved me. I knew which loved me. And it was like, Lord, I have suffered, but in my suffering, you are with me. But if I carry the hurt in my heart, how would other people look at me? They would just think I'm an awful, old, grummy human being. And how I cannot change my face, the appearance of my face, except you are with me. So my prayer is, since I wrote the letter and you didn't take me, and you said, my child, you will not die, but I will be with you. I said, please take the frown from my face that I have and replace it with a smile. That no matter what situation I face in my life, that a smile must always be on